Thank you for coming, everyone. We really appreciate your presence over here. There were many individuals who did not want us to proceed with this event, actually. Over the past 2 weeks, some of them ripped off our flyers. And today in the morning also, I saw one of the flyers were stripped off in the building over here in Benson. And like as an organization, we condemn these acts of vandalism, and these acts violate our free speech rights, and they are intended to dissuade our club from being active and holding events. One of the perpetrators was a student over here, and thankfully she has been disciplined according to the student code. This is not who we are, and this is not reflective of our values. Those individuals who disagree with us, you are very welcome to come and debate with us in a civil manner, and we encourage that. But those individuals who seek to suppress our voice again and again, like every year we face that, you have to understand that we will not stop and we will keep fighting for our voices over here. And we will not be deterred by your threats or whatever. And again, like thank you to the administration and the staff over here who has been really helpful to us in setting this event up, and like they have been really supportive of us throughout the incidents we have faced. So today we have Paulina over here, who is a US Air Force veteran, a Fox News commentator, an activist, and she works for the Turning Point as the Director of Hispanic Engagement. And she will be talking about why gun rights are essential to women's rights. But before we begin the event, there are some security protocols issued by the university. People cannot prevent others from entering or leaving the venue. People must allow the speaker to speak. People who wish to voice disagreement should use appropriate methods to engage the speaker and others, such as question and answer. Silent forms of protest signs are allowed, as long as they do not obstruct the view of others. Any violations by anyone will be documented and managed appropriately according to the Student Conduct Code. Thank you.
Oh, can you guys hear me okay with this? Okay. So my name is Paulina. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am the Director of Hispanic Engagement with Turning Point USA. And I would like to say that I came from Portland in an effort to get away from the rainy weather, and apparently I came to more of it. So I am a California native. I actually was born and raised in Southern California, and I did most of my high school in Los Angeles. I actually went to 6 high schools. One of those high schools was Venice High School, of which there was a gang-related shooting when I was on campus prior to me graduating in my junior year. Aside from that, before I was 9 years old, I walked into 2 armed robberies. I had a cousin who was murdered and a best friend who was killed when I was 17. So you would imagine that I would probably be one of the most, I'd say, strongest voices in regards to gun control, but it's actually the exact opposite. I realized very early on that it was the Second Amendment that enabled me to protect myself, and it was actually people doing evil acts that were not, or that were inherently not be able to be regulated by us regulating the Second Amendment. So you cannot stop people from doing inherently evil things. They're going to do what they're going to do anyways, and us basically putting guidelines and regulations on the Second Amendment on legal gun owners would not stop those evil things from happening. So it wasn't really though until I was actually stationed in Missouri, so I was about 20 years old, when I actually decided to more or less become an advocate for the Second Amendment. So prior to that, I did not own a firearm. I didn't see the reason for me to do so, and in fact, I really had no care or want to really back the Second Amendment, right? I was serving in the military, I really didn't think that I had to own a gun. I was stationed at Wyman Air Force Base in Missouri, and I had just been given permission to live off base. So how it works in the military is when you're a younger ranking airman, at least in the Air Force, if you show good conduct for while you're on base, they give you base privileges and you can move off base. It was when I was living off base that I ended up getting a female roommate who was my coworker, Brittany. She worked in the air traffic control tower. And it was Brittany who I figured would be a great roommate. We never thought to run a background check on our landlord, and seeing that there's a bunch of you young faces in this room, I will say you should always run a background check on your landlord because of what happened. So I came home one day from work. It was around 11 o'clock at night. I was on a swing shift. and I noticed that my back door was unlocked. I thought it was Brittany just forgetting to lock up the house before she had gone to work, so I called her, made a mention of it. She said it wasn't her. I figured she'd probably forgotten and let it go. The next day, the same thing happened, except when I came home, my central ceiling fan wouldn't turn on. So I had to walk through my dark house at around 11 o'clock at night, got into the kitchen, turned on the kitchen lights, and find my back door physically open about 2 inches. I realized that the light bulb had been unscrewed in my ceiling fan, and at that point in time, I called Brittany, really freaked out. I told her what had happened, and she had an alibi. She was with her boyfriend. So I went into work the following day, told them what was happening, and my work at the time, because of our shift work that we were doing and the amount of workload that we had just on base, really thought that I was stressed out. Maybe I needed to talk to someone. I of course did so, but I knew that I should always essentially go with my gut. That was something that my mom had always taught me to do. And following that, I had a cousin come in town for a couple of days, and after he left, I had this really terrible feeling that something bad was going to happen. So what I ended up doing is I started calling my coworkers, and I said, hey, look, would you mind at least just like crashing on my couch? I just feel like that there's something wrong. Next day, I have my friend Carson sleep over on the couch, nothing happens. Following day, I get home, same thing happens, except I have my friend Jeremy staying with me, who's a cop on base. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, this individual decides to break into my house when he thought I was home alone. He was timing it to when the trains were going by so that I wouldn't be able to hear him when he came to the house. And unbeknownst to him, Jeremy was there, and Jeremy actually chased him out of the house. So we filed a police report. Long story short, it ended up being my landlord who was breaking into my house. Now, at that point in time, if Jeremy wasn't there, I don't know if I'd be standing in front of you guys. And for about 2 years, it completely freaked me out. I wasn't able to stay at home alone. I'd go around at night. The minute it started getting dark, and I'd lock all the doors and windows, and I felt like a little kid again. And it wasn't until I PCSed to Florida and I got my concealed carry that I really felt that my sense of security had been restored. So I know, and one thing that I come across at many schools that I talk to is the fact that in certain states, some people can't carry, or you might have restrictions on campus. So I say that even if you guys aren't comfortable with firearms, you should always make sure that you are maintaining some form of security in your house, whether it's with a taser. In some places you can have a coup baton. I know in the state of New York, in New York City, actually you can't have even tasers. But if you can have a coup baton, that's the second best option. But anyways, leading forward from there, I realized that there were a lot of women in my situation who didn't necessarily, whether they experienced it or not, they didn't necessarily want that to happen again, and potentially by me telling my story that I could prevent a lot of women from going through that future experience and possibly prevent them from getting hurt in the future. So what I started doing is I started using my Instagram at the time, of which I had around 60,000 followers, which for me early on was a rather smaller following. But it was because I was modeling that I had gained that following. And I started talking about me going to the range, why I was an advocate for the Second Amendment, and why it was so important that women essentially learned how to use a firearm in order to protect themselves. And I realized at that point in time that there were many people and companies who eventually just started distancing themselves from me, because they realized that they had this stigma about firearms, that firearms were essentially this big, bad, evil thing, not really understanding the value that it could bring to the table for a woman to be able to protect herself. So the more I decided to speak out against it, the more I realized how wrong it was in society, that we weren't essentially empowering other women to protect themselves, and we were creating this victim mentality. So I can say this, I've sat through probably, I'd say 20 or 30 hours of sexual assault and prevention training with the military. And I can say that yes, in a certain sense, you can educate people as to what's right and what's wrong. But at the end of the day, the problem with instances of rape and sexual assault is it's been going on since the beginning of time. And that there is 100% guarantee that I will be able to stop someone that's trying to hurt me with a firearm than if I call 911. And I can tell you right now, having been in those situations and circumstance, 911 was not there for me when I needed it to be, and had Jeremy not been there, I honestly can tell you guys, I don't think that I would be here today, because the guy ended up having a rap sheet and he had some priors. He was very well known in the town that we were in, and in fact, local law enforcement didn't, in my opinion, take the issue as serious as I would have liked, and it actually was the military that ended up getting us out of that situation. And they threatened to press charges for federal stalking of a federal employee, and that's really how I got out of that situation and was ordered back on campus and then PCS to a different duty station. But the point is that when you have people that aren't in these situations and they go into political positions and they're in positions of power and then they tell you, you do not have the right to defend yourself, that's a huge problem. And aside from that, looking at this from really perspective of someone who took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, you look at it as a standpoint as the Second Amendment really empowers the people to always remain stronger than their government. Without the Second Amendment, you don't have the First Amendment. Without the Second Amendment, you really have no way of protecting yourself from a totalitarian government. And I hate to say it, but that is the reason why we are the way that we are in the United States. We are one of the world superpowers. We have freedom of choice, freedom of thought, freedom of speech in some cases, although in many universities it is oppressed. But if it were not for that Second Amendment, we would not have any of these liberties. And I can say that I've been to over 25 countries around the world, to include the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and I can say that we really are the token country. People around the world want to come here. They hold us to a higher standard as to what they model their countries after, and I really take pride in the fact that I am an American in that instance. But I can tell you guys right now that when you have people that try to oppress a woman and really say that, hey, this is actually, there's a more likely probability of you actually getting hurt by having a firearm than if you don't have a firearm to begin with. I completely disagree with that, and having grown up and seen the things that I do, I can say that the Second Amendment to me is something that I consider a personal fight, and that it's the goal and it should be the responsibility of every single person in this room, whether or not you don't agree with the Second Amendment, to fight for it, because it is that right that gives you the ability to disagree with me, period. And I think that a lot of people don't understand the correlation that the Second Amendment has with the First Amendment, and I can say that I don't know if there's people here that are here to disagree with me right now, but I can tell you that you wouldn't be able to disagree with me if we were in a place like Venezuela currently. I just send the secret police after you and you'd be arrested, and that's the problem that you have when you take away that Second Amendment from the people. So, that's a little bit about my story and how I really became an advocate for the Second Amendment. But if there is people here right now that disagree with me, I'd like to have you guys stand up first, and then followed by taking questions for those who would like to ask me whatever it is that you guys want to ask. Questions?
So this event is called, I think, Gun Rights Are Good for Women's Rights. I understand how having guns increases our ability to protect ourselves from sexual assault and stuff. I totally agree. Can you explain how guns rights are good for women's rights? Because it's we have the right to protect ourselves. And it's us giving you a gun isn't giving you the right not to get sexually assaulted. How are women's rights getting elevated besides just
So men and women are biologically created differently. So I can tell you right now that I don't know if there's a big dude in this room, if he's coming at me with the intent to assault me, to hurt me, there's a very likely possibility, just on the fact that he's producing more testosterone, and when you have adrenaline pumping through that he's going to be able to harm and hurt me. It is my right as an American citizen to defend myself. Shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment gives me that right to defend myself. When an individual, whether it is a male or female, makes that decision to try to hurt you, whether it is through sexual assault or in some cases like what's happened to my family members, murder, it is my right to defend myself. That is a woman's right. And if you want to say that that's a people's right, that's a people's right too.
But we already had the right to defend ourselves, so gun rights.
But do you think that you'd be able to take on a 200-pound dude without a firearm?
No, because we're so biologically different.
Okay, so then that's exactly the point then, right there. You have the right to defend yourself. Otherwise, I mean, you might have that in theory, but guess what? 200-pound dude's coming at you pissed off, it's not going to do anything.
I don't have that in theory. I'm just saying, so is your only argument that gun rights improve women's rights because they enable women to protect themselves?
No, my only argument is that I've experienced it, but if you'd like to rename the title, I'm sure we're open to suggestions.
Oh, no.
Okay, then I guess we're done.
Hi, I just have a question about, I guess, kind of the marketing of the event, because I definitely agree with the idea that guns rights are women's rights. However, kind of just in talking to some of my friends who are women, it just kind of the way that you were marketing it on the poster and kind of hyper-sexualized manner. Like, why is it that that photo was like chosen? Because I think in many instances within the media, women are, when they are presented with guns, they are presented like within like the male gaze to be like hyper-sexualized. And I just wanted to know like if you have input into like what photo of yourself was to be chosen.
No, I actually typically leave it up to the chapters to choose, but I will say that that photo I actually happen to love. I had got a gold-plated AR-15. Not a gold, it's technically Cerakote. Do you guys know what Cerakote is?
No.
Okay, it's basically like a spray paint job. It's a gold AR-15, I happen to love it. I don't believe that I'm hyper-sexualizing my image. I think unfortunately, you know, if you guys want to start like arguing the whole Amber Rose slut walk talk here, I think that it's really ironic to see like the differences in opinion of what like hypersexualized is, because frankly I was wearing a tank top and like I wear that to the gym. But I mean, I understand. I actually have a couple of cool photos if you'd like to see those on my social media of me just shooting and me just out at the range. But I mean, that's again, that's not really ever my input. That's usually what the school chapters choose.
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious just to see like your level of like consent like in regards to the photo, if that's like empowering to you. Like,
Well, for me, I put all my photos up. I choose to take them, and I have no problem with if they decide to use them or not because I put it out there in the first place. And frankly, I will say this: I take no Dylan arrows, but it's a machine gun manufacturer, and I think that it's okay to embrace your feminine side and be working around firearms. I don't think that you have to maintain that certain stigma or image. I think the problem is, especially when you are teaching self-defense to women, is you don't want to alienate anyone. So I've worked with people, from doctors to attorneys to my own mom who's a professor to women that you would never really think of probably ever owning firearms. And I think that if you really are trying to empower other women, that you shouldn't put them in a box.
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, it's kind of getting the context when you talk about gun rights, like, what do you mean? Because it sounds like you're largely talking about the capacity of not abolishing the Second Amendment, which, me being liberal, absolutely agree with. But I think it's more working within the middle ground for saying something like enhanced background check. So, like, for example, I imagine you would agree that your landlord shouldn't have had access to a firearm, right? If he had a
So just so you know, the process for owning a firearm in all states is you have to go through a federal background check.
No, I'm aware of that, but I mean, when you have instances where there's people who have a demonstrated history of violence,
They're not supposed to own firearms as part of that background check.
But we all know those background checks like aren't as thorough as they should be.
Have you owned a firearm before, and have you gone through the background check?
I mean, no, you don't have to.
So how do you know how the process is?
Know about this stuff.
Because as far as the background check goes, is if you have a history of stalking, violent behavior, you can't own a firearm, period. And the individual, as far as I know, didn't break into my house with a firearm.
But you said that the police didn't handle your case correctly, like they didn't take it seriously.
I would have preferred that you'd have been locked up without a key. Yes, correct. But that has nothing to do with the federal background check, and again, this individual did not break into my house with a firearm.
right, so sorry, I was just using that as one example, but another example, and maybe this will go into what you're talking about, like the defense of the state issue, but a solution that wouldn't really infringe on the self-defense use of a firearm, but something that would say limit like magazine capacity size to prevent the use for something like a mass violence event like we've seen on school campuses.
Over 97% of those mass shootings occurred in areas that were gun-free zones.
What does that have to do
I will
with-
tell you this hands down right now that a max capacity magazine, in my opinion, is not going to stop people from doing evil things. The Oklahoma City bomber killed hundreds of people, and that was not even with a firearm. You have people in the UK that's not really publicized that are taken out with vehicles. I mean, if people want to hurt you, they're going to do it in any way, shape, or form. But the bigger focus here, and what people forget to realize, is that in a perfect world where there is no evil, where you don't have the threat of a government essentially doing what happened in Nazi Germany, taking away the right of the people to own firearms and then bringing in a socialist and totalitarian government, is the fact that what makes us the United States of America is the fact that we do have our Second Amendment, and that limiting the legal right of responsible gun owners will not stop evil things from happening. Jeffrey Dahmer, literally raped and ate people, and that was not with a firearm, and he took out I don't know how many people. I mean, the guy was a sicko. People are going to do sick things to begin with. It's not going to have anything to do with limiting a magazine capacity.
Well, what I mean in that example is similar in the example you're using of it's an equalizer of if there's someone being attacked by a 200-pound man and you have a firearm, you can defend yourself more easily, is if you have that person who has evil intent, who wants to be violent, if they have a magazine that has a limit of 5 rounds, they can't do nearly as much damage as someone who has, say, like a 20 or 30-pound round.
If you really want to get into the plot of that, if you really were to get really great at shooting, you really wanted to kill that many people, it's just a quicker reload time. I don't think that that's a viable option. I think it's a very hypothetical situation. I think that if people had, well, exactly, but the difference is that I'm talking historically with what's happened with government. I'm talking about a personal experience, and I'm telling you right now that limiting the legal right of gun owners to own firearms, whether or not you agree with its max capacity, I don't really care, because that's my Second Amendment right. I don't have to sit here and turn to my firearms, and I'm telling you right now, there is millions of people that are law enforcement, military, and government personnel who would not enforce those orders, and it's really, really, really ridiculous that you have people in government that think, because they are holding those elected positions, that the American people are just going to say, sure, take our guns. Hell no, it's not going to happen. And by the way, try telling that to someone who owns a firearm.
No,
No, you're fine. I appreciate the debate. I'm just.
Yeah, no, so I
You're
guess,
good.
sorry, this is the last thing because I don't want to take.
No, I appreciate you doing this. It helps.
Yeah, well,
I appreciate it.
Is there any degree of gun control that you would support? Or
The only thing I support is a federal concealed carry. I think that across the board, if you had states aligning with an agreement for everyone getting a federal background check, so that we could have a federal concealed carry and have reciprocity in all states, I support that 100%.
Okay, but you're satisfied with the federal background check that's in place as it is now?
I've had multiple federal background checks in multiple states, and yeah, I think it's a pain in the ass every time, but guess what I do, and I have my firearms.
Right, but it means you're happy with like the extent of vetting that it does?
I think that right now what we have is fine, yes.
Okay.
For questions, I would request all of you to raise your hands and not interrupt between when two people are interacting. Thank you.
Just as a question of rights, do you support, so I know that you're fine with the federal background check system as is. Do you think the role of government extends to taking it away if someone has a proven rap sheet like your landlord? Like, does that person lose his right to owning a firearm and to self-defense?
People, as of right now, as far as I'm aware of, cannot own firearms if they have felonies and if they have a history of stalking or abuse, so that's already in effect.
But do you support that personally?
Yes.
Can you just speak to like can you just speak about like the recent legislation regarding guns and background checks? I don't really know
Was
much
it
about
HR 11 and HR 8, I think it is?
Honestly, don't know much about it. I just know that it occurred, and I was wondering what your input on it was.
So I think that the biggest problem with that, and in a point that Congressman Dan Crenshaw of Texas actually brought up, is the fact that in the instance, for example, speaking from personal experience of what happened with me, let's say that my roommate Brittany had a firearm in the house. She wasn't home. I knew where the firearm was. This individual broke into the house. Legally, by that legislation being passed, it would criminalize me for using that firearm to defend myself. I don't agree with it, and again, that goes into the fact that I think that you have people with zero life experience in positions of power that make these rulings and legislations, and what ends up happening is actually oppresses and it keeps the American people's hands tied for those that are not essentially going to do evil things and carry out evil acts with these firearms. This debate, I think it's stupid for one. I don't know why in any way, shape, or form the American people would want to give up their rights to own firearms because of historically what's happened. And I think that it's funny to think of, okay, well, let's just put it this way. Right now, I'm going to come up with a very hypothetical situation. If you guys have the ability to own a firearm, and let's say tomorrow I'm like, you guys are wrong, I don't agree with anything that you have to say, and I'm in a position of power, and I'm going to essentially say, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to arrest you all. Guess what the one thing protecting you is from me? You can answer the question.
Gun? So like,
Hold on, I'll get to you in a second, I'm still on this question.
I then ask the follow-up question, like, so to what extent do you think people should be allowed to have like different kinds of weaponry, like 'cause honestly, we're not going to be able to fight the U.S. government with like.
Well, you guys talk about the U.S. government as in who makes up the U.S. government, because the U.S. government is not just like this big evil monster. It's consisting of other people, and I can't say having been a member of the U.S. government and a federal employee there are many people like you and I who might have differing opinions but are in these different positions of power. So I will say that when people come up with this, oh, well, what did the Second Amendment, what was it intended to be? I mean, do you really want me protecting myself with a cannonball? Because I mean, if you go back to when the Second Amendment was historically written, I mean, they had literally like muskets and cannonballs, and I'm not gonna put cannonballs around my house.
Yeah, but like, I'm just saying, like, if you really, let's say there was like a civil war and you needed to protect yourself against tyranny, like, you would not have a tank, so how would you?
I mean, there's certain people in Texas that have tanks. I'm saying that, and by the way, people can own different firearms. You have to have a class 3. Actually, I was just talking to this lovely woman right here earlier about that. But there is different classifications as to what you have, obviously, right now, especially with, do you know what a silencer is? Okay, so like right now you have to have a class 3 to own a silencer. I mean, there are these safety precautions in place, but I do not believe that it is the right of government to tell the American people that they cannot own firearms, and in order to do so, then turn around and regulate it. Frankly, we're not the UK. The last time, and I had this conversation again earlier with this lovely woman right here, the last time that a government asked for the American people to turn in their firearms, we ended up in a revolution. And people like to forget where we were founded on, where we were from. We are the United States of America. We're not founded on this political correctness, weak mentality. It is the right of the American people to defend ourselves, and that is why they wrote that into the Constitution of the United States of America.
Next question, please.
So I kind of just noticed there's this, a lot of people tend to want to ban guns on certain types of features. I'm not going to go against your argument, I just wanted to add some, little information. For example, we actually did have an assault weapons ban in 1994. That lasted until 2004. ATF data has suggested that the ban has actually not stopped gun violence. In fact, since the ban, gun violence has went down. And also, considering magazine capacities, the ATF has published data that magazine capacity restrictions in restrictive states such as California and New York has actually not reduced gun violence. It has remained the same. The only thing that has happened is that criminals have had access to standard capacity magazines, while law-abiding citizens have only had 10-round magazines. And banning firearms in terms of what their features are is just really limiting, and considering, as Paulina was mentioning earlier, there are certain types of firearms that are heavily restricted, such as machine guns. If you try to buy a machine gun, for example, you have to undergo an ATF background check that's going to be like several months. Like
That's a class 3 too.
Exactly, class 3. And if you do pass that, there's a huge cost of entry. Like, for example, if you want to buy a transferable machine gun in the registry of the ATF, you'll pay around $25,000.
Machine gun already, like, why are we, like, costs like that don't matter. It's
can you not
already
interrupt?
Oh,
a
it's fine.
thing.
Can you repeat?
Like, no one needs a machine gun.
Excuse me, hold on, just real quick. Do you like the way of life that you have right now?
Yeah.
Do you like Starbucks?
Yeah.
Do you wear Ugg boots? Do you like everything you have it, right?
What?
I'm getting to your point. Have you been to Mexico? To look at his
yeah.
account?
Yeah.
Mexico City, have you been down there? Do you know what's happening right there?
I've been to one.
Okay, so TJ, so are you aware of what's happening right now in Mexico? Just curious with the cartels and the warring factions and the rights of the Mexican. Okay, so do you know what's happening in Mexico's government with the level of corruption?
Yeah.
Okay, so are you aware of the fact that right now Mexico, its people don't actually have the ability to protect themselves and own firearms? Are you aware of the fact that the only people that own firearms at this point in time are the military and law enforcement, of which half are bought, half are corrupt, and half of them are forcing these people into manufacturing drugs and trafficking them?
Yeah, like, I like definitely think that's a problem, but that's, we're, like, America is not in the state that, like, Mexico or.
That is exactly
No,
why we're on that
okay,
state, because
so,
we
like,
have the right to protect ourselves and own firearms, and I know it's hard for you to understand,
No,
but I'm
it's
telling
not. It's not, like, so I, like, agree with you, like, I'm not against the Second Amendment. Like, I think that people should be able to have, like, handguns. Like, as a female, I agree with you, like, I, like, would like, if, like, I felt that it was necessary, like, I, like, would like to be able to, like, protect myself, like, with a firearm. Like, I don't think I'll ever need one, but, like, yeah, I think that's a right that should be protected. protected, you know? But like, I just like think that like, let's be like reasonable about this, like.
You know that
if
certain
I'm getting,
handguns
like,
have
if
15
I'm
round
getting, like,
capacities,
If
right?
I'm getting sexually assaulted, what is the difference between me having a handgun and me having like an automatic weapon? Like, why do you need an automatic
Frankly,
weapon?
I'll tell you this right now. Frankly, right now, most AR-15s, by the way, are semi-automatic, meaning that they're not automatic. And aside from that, the difference is whether or not you feel comfortable. It is your right as an American citizen to own one. I'm telling you right now, I am a better shot on my AR-15 than I am with my 9mm. Period. So that means that I have one next to my nightstand, and you might not like it, but that's too bad because I've lived through a home invasion and you haven't.
I just think that there's like things like I just think that like why does like supporting the Second Amendment have to be such a blanket thing? Like it's either all or nothing. I don't understand.
Because when you let people start to put regulations and thus chip away very slowly at the Second Amendment, eventually you end up with nothing. The problem with that is if you want to truly maintain a free society, a free nation, and everything that you have right now with your way of life, the people must always remain more powerful than their government. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here right now because I'm not. But I'm telling you right now, your way of life, the way that we have it in the United States of America, is not seen anywhere else in the world. And that is the reason why over 4 million people are waiting to come here legally every single year. That is the reason why so many people want to come here illegally, because we have the greatest nation on the face of the planet, and our way of life is not seen anywhere else in the world because we have the right to own our firearms. And that is exactly why they wrote that in our Second Amendment, or in our Constitution.
But America also has like the most like gun violence and like mass shootings, so like that doesn't like. Just
I really don't think you've been to Mexico.
I just like. I think you're trying to attack me.
No, we're debating. I'm not attacking you. I'm literally rebuttaling your points right now because I don't agree with them, but I'm not attacking you.
I just think that's like an invalid fear. Like, are you like that concerned? Like, do you think that's like a probable thing that America at some like in the coming years could have like this revolution where we need to like fight against the government? Like, where?
I think it's a
where's,
problem
like,
when
threshold?
people think that it's okay for them to put stipulations on the rest of America because they don't agree. I think it's narcissistic and egocentric.
Okay, sorry.
I think a lot of like gun control advocacy comes from like school shootings, for example, in the aftermath of school shootings. So I guess my question would be like, what would your solution be to the mass amounts of school shootings that we've seen in the past 2 years of the United States of America?
So I can say, having been on a campus where a school shooting took place, and having been that literally, unfortunately, with school shootings, they're obviously very evil acts and very sick individuals that are carrying out these like horrific things. But again, over 97% of them occur in gun-free zones, and frankly, with the most recent one in Parkland, the law enforcement didn't even respond in time. And in fact, Kyle Kashuv, who's one of my co-workers and the director of high school engagement with Turning Point, likes to talk on that all the time, because frankly, if you had people in that area that were encouraged to use firearms to protect themselves, I don't know if that would be a problem. I think the real thing that we need to address here is, why is it that people feel the need to do these evil things, and why are they made celebrities on television? Because a lot of these people, after they're done, receive an insane amount of attention. And if you look at, psychologically what they're getting out of that, I mean, a lot of these people have reached out for attention before. They're using their social media in order to do so. And I'm not blaming it 100% on social media, but how many of you have an Instagram or Facebook here? Okay, so of all those people that have social media, how many of you have in some instances been like, oh, I want to take a cool picture of that for other people to see, or feel the need to change maybe something about yourself in order to do so for social media? Be honest. Okay, so I have like a couple of honest people here. I think the problem is society in itself and how we address things, and I think a big problem is when you take the moral hand out of society, that's the kind of thing that happens. I can say that I've seen a lot of crap growing up, and I have not had the easiest life, but I can say also this: I do believe in the good and humanity, and I will say that limiting the people's right to own firearms is not going to solve those problems. If people really want to kill people and do horrific things, I mean, you have a number of ways you can do it, and I think that if we take away firearms, they're just going to resort to doing bombs. And in fact, in the Middle East, a lot of what we're seeing is, IEDs, and I think that it's, a surprise that it hasn't been greater here. But I think that if we continue down the path that we're going to, that it will eventually happen.
By like gun-free zone, do you just mean a school zone?
No, gun-free zones. I mean, it can be school zones, but gun-free zones also would be, I guess, considered like certain areas of Los Angeles and places where they absolutely don't allow firearms. Period.
But like if someone's all like, wait, so your argument is that, so like mass shootings, like they occur in gun-free zones. So is that, you're just saying like gun-free zones don't work?
Correct.
How do, what? Oh, so like you'd be like pro like arming teachers and stuff then? So
I think that they should encourage teachers to carry on campus, absolutely. And in fact, I think that there's a different aspect of our job that we talk about the NRA, but like campus advocacy for the Second Amendment. I think that, when I was on campus, it was considered a gun-free zone. I had my concealed carry in the state of Florida, but I couldn't carry on campus. I think that that's dumb. If I went through the federal background check and I've been given the blessing by the government to carry, why not?
yeah, but so are you saying that like the mass shootings, like had they, I don't know how to say this. So like if they're a gun-free zone, right? So like
They were, yeah.
so you're saying like gun-free zones don't work?
Correct.
So you're saying that like,
I think that just having a zone labeled gun-free is not going to stop someone from coming in and doing a bad thing. And frankly, as taboo as it sounds, the only thing possible to stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun, and that's why people tend to call 911. But 911 isn't that fast.
I'm happy to allow other people to ask questions as well. And please don't interrupt them again.
I think just still going on the mass school shootings topic, do you think it's okay that we're allowing our kids, I guess, suggesting to our kids that, carrying during school, say example for teachers like you advocated just there, do you think that's okay to familiarize our kids with such high weaponry from such an early age? Because most of these school shootings, not all of them, but they're elementary through high school. And very formidable years for such young kids in our...
I think when you teach a child to responsibly respect a firearm, there's a less increased chance of that. In fact, I grew up with my dad taking me out to the range from time to time, and I can tell you I never looked at a firearm as a toy. I was taught to respect it, and that's essentially was my intro. Then again, I didn't really care about the Second Amendment until I had something really crappy happen to me, and I decided to use my voice to help other women avoid that in the future, because home invasion, if you haven't lived through that, it can be very scary.
Any more?
So, I guess the question that I have is, if you compare the United States to countries like Australia or Western European countries which have stricter gun control, they do not have nearly as many mass shootings. So would you say that that's just a case of correlation or causation, or how would you respond to that?
I think that the difference between places like the UK or Australia is that we don't bow to a queen. I think that in the United States, we have a certain way of life, and that if you would like to live in a country like that, by all means, but that's not our way of life, and that's exactly why we have the standards of living that we do. I think as far as that goes, I mean, you can look at the other correlated instances of when people decide to do crazy stuff and hit people with cars. I think that that data and those statistics don't really apply because it's a completely different country, different government in general, period.
Okay, so are you saying that you don't think that the level of gun control in those countries makes gun violence go down versus in the United States? Like, do you think that if the United States tried the model that Australia or the UK or France had, that it would have no positive effect on gun deaths?
I think that people are going to do evil things to begin with. I think that those places, if you look at what's happening right now in France, they're literally being essentially killed in the streets because they don't agree with what's happening in their government, and that is, again, what sets us apart from places like France, the UK, and Australia. And by the way, I don't really care that Australia gave up their right to own firearms. We're not the Australia, we're the United States, and that's why people from Australia try to come here, not vice versa.
Who in France is getting killed?
Can you please not interrupt? We are having like.
No, that's fine. If you have time, it's fine. If you have time later on, just go ahead and Google the riots that they have over there. A lot of people are aware of it.
Yellow jacket protesters have been killed.
None of them at all.
No, I think that's just like untrue.
I think it's like true, and you should definitely Google it.
I'm sorry I have to break it off over here, but we have to allow other people to ask questions. Again, please do not interrupt.
This is more of like a personal question, but how is it working for Turning Point USA? And then how do you think that Candace and Charlie should get married?
So Candace is actually engaged to someone from the UK. And I think that, I don't know if she's leading up the UK division of Turning Point, so Turning Point's going well. Other than that, I love my job, I can't complain. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, so just, you mentioned a lot asking people who have asked questions, have you been to Mexico to understand what's happening there? Have you been to France or the UK?
I have been to the UK, and I do have family in France via my father, who's engaged to a Vietnamese woman, and she has family there. Yes, absolutely. In
Right,
Paris.
and they're describing to you
What's happening
violence
on
that's
campus.
higher than, say, in the United States. 'Cause
Well,
I
in
lived the
Mexico,
UK
if
for the
you're
last
asking-
6 months, and it's
If
Not in any
you're
way.
talking about France, then absolutely yes. Definitely describing that, and that a lot of that's been publicized, of which the mainstream media news has not picked up. Breitbart was reporting on it a lot. Aside from that, I haven't been to the UK in a really long time, probably about 6 years. But I can say that they're having issues right now with terrorist threats, and I have friends that are stationed in Longstuhl, Germany, and they get the reports there directly. So I can say that, you know, depending on if you're, I don't know, at like a sandals resort in the UK or whatever, but having friends over there, yeah, I get a little bit different reporting.
right. I was living in London, but the question I would have then is, are you suggesting that the way you make these places better is that you just increase gun ownership? So essentially in Mexico, you get rid of the cartels, you get rid of high rates
Well,
of
so the
poverty
problem-
just by providing more
The problem with
firearms?
Mexico and what's happening right now is the only people that own firearms are very corrupt, and they hold all the power. So what's happening is the people are essentially forced into servitude, not something that, do you guys know what the Republican National Hispanic Assembly is? Maybe not. I work with them directly, and they talk to the ambassador of Mexico, and right now the president of Mexico is considering giving back the right of the the Mexican people to own firearms because of that reason. When you have people that are forced into instances of trafficking drugs, it really makes for kind of a disaster. I do think that in that instance where you do have a high level of corruption, the only way to combat that is to arm the people to fight for themselves. I don't think that you can just sit there and ask people to do the right thing.
Okay, and then this
You have
is,
to fight for it.
right, and I appreciate this dialogue, and this is the last question because I do want to be mindful of other people with questions, but how would you then respond to the fact that per capita the United States has one of the highest incidents of gun violence, even though you're citing it as like essentially one of the example states for gun
Countries.
rights? Countries, apologies. States as in like national state, not like state like 50 states, but I get your point.
I still go to say that the reason that we maintain the way of life that we have here, and the reason that our rights are protected, and the way that they are is because we have the right to the Second Amendment. If you look at places like the UK, they don't have freedom of speech, and in fact, they are very censored. And in fact, who was the activist that was recently in jail? Do you know who I'm talking about? Tommy Robinson. Okay, this guy, because he was just streaming, was thrown into jail. He was held there without bail. I mean, the guy was totally persecuted for freedom of speech. That is what happens. That is what you jeopardize when you turn in your right to own firearms. So by the way, no, in the UK, owning a shotgun with like 2 rounds doesn't count.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for coming here. I had one question, and I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's this thing called the Dickey Amendment, 1994. It was passed.
The Dick Act?
No, the Dickey Amendment.
Okay.
And it was in 1994, and basically it prevented the CDC from studying gun violence and ways to reduce it. Now, I'm a proponent for the Second Amendment, you know, I understand. My family owns guns. Guns are fun. I like shooting them. That's why I'm here. But I don't understand why we can't study it. Because it seems to me that that doesn't infringe upon the rights of citizens if the government does. And I feel like we could find ways to combat gun violence, that issue, without resulting in confiscating weapons. But it feels like, at least the NRA, this law has been on the books the last about 25 years, but they haven't really done anything to address this.
I think the problem with that and where it kind of gets hazy is then you have HIPAA, right? So you have people and their medical rights and their medical privacy. I think that especially for now with instances of vets coming back with reported cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, whether or not they're exhibiting violent behavior, they're afraid that they're going to lose their Second Amendment right. It does do crossover. I don't see why we couldn't take studies and really cases of what's happened to try to solve the problem. But again, people like to pretend that there's no such thing as evil. And I think that that's where people are out to lunch. I think that to sit here and say that by you confiscating or limiting the ability of the American people to own certain capacity magazines is going to stop something, I think that's foolish. And having been through situations in my life where I've personally been on both ends, I can say that people are going to do evil things whether or not you try to prevent them. So that's a Hail Mary in my opinion. And I think that the only thing it really does is limit the American people to protect themselves and really infringe on the rights of us, as a people that have been given that by the Constitution.
Yeah.
I think that by that argument, you may as well start, putting regulations on free speech, which they're already doing.
Well, it's not that, it's just that with auto accidents, we give about $240 million a year, around there every year. We study auto accidents, we figured out like people wear seat belts, or if we put airbags in certain positions, like that helps reduce auto vehicle deaths, which is about the same as gun deaths. And I feel like if we gave at least some funding to it or remove the Dickey Amendment, that could preserve the rights of citizens, while at the same time we could focus on maybe things like you were saying, mental illness, and what programs we could do to help people in that sense. Other people have questions, so.
I like that too, like what you said.
Hello, thank you for coming today. I appreciate you voicing your perspective. So going off of kind of the recent questions that have been spoken about in terms of school shootings, I think it's important to look at it as like mass shootings perspective, not just in school settings, of course, and seeing that in since Sandy Hook, which was in 2012, that there has been, I think, 1,900 mass shootings, and I can pull it up. It was on Vox, I was just checking. But one thing that I was just curious of is when it comes to specifically, I guess you're saying that teachers should be armed and that's how we can protect school shootings. I think it's also important to acknowledge that the status quo right now with the amount of mass shootings in comparison to other countries, regardless of if the United States is not one to compare with other countries, it's still important to acknowledge that there is an issue and that people are being killed on a daily basis. So how can we ensure that outside of school shootings that we are also protecting the well-being of the citizens as well as those who are owning these guns?
I think it's really important so people keep focusing on this mass shooting thing. I think that what people are forgetting is why isn't it that those mass shootings are occurring in areas that enable guns? Because I know that the last attempt at shooting up a nightclub, the individual was shot and killed by a female security officer. And I can say that when you have stats that say 97% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, I think that that's your answer right there. I think that if you empower the people to protect themselves, because at the end of the day, the reason why we maintain the way of life is because we own firearms, and you take that into account as that being a responsibility, I think that's your solution. I think that it's silly to sit there, and if you really want to protect other people, then learn how to protect yourself and back the Second Amendment.
Okay, so you would just think that having individuals walking with guns, like in certain states, that is allowed.
I think what would be better is if they came along with a federal concealed carry, so that people could be approved across the board and carry in every state. Because right now, even though I can carry in Florida, Oregon, and Washington, I can't carry in California. And California has a way higher instance of shooting and violence than somewhere like Texas or Las Vegas or Arizona, where in Arizona you don't even have to go through that background check.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
kind of going off of the ideas of violence at schools. It was 2 weeks ago, one of the Turning Point representatives, Hayden Williams, was assaulted while talking on campus. And so I wanted to see what your opinion about that was, of violence against people who try to speak up and voice different opinions, and what you think we can do to prevent that.
So I know that with a concealed carry, I would obviously never utilize deadly force in an instance of someone just trying to hit me and punch me. I will say though that right now, the biggest thing that I see across campuses, and one of the primary topics of Turning Point USA, is vocalizing the fact that many students on different campuses are not able to voice their opinions without being punished, and in certain instances are afraid to do so. So in an instance where you guys are sitting out, hanging out here like this, we're able to talk whether or not you guys agree with me. I can say that when I was at the University of Virginia, that they were protesting and yelling and screaming at me. So that was like whack-a-mole with protesters. And there's actually more protesters there to yell at me than there was to actually talk with me and establish dialogue. So I think that, you know, in those instances, obviously you should never resort to violence because someone doesn't agree with you. I think that that's childish, and I think that that's stupid, and it doesn't solve anything.
And then follow up to that, as you're talking about people using hands and fists, do you think we should enact fist control, because more people are killed by fists than they are with rifles, and we want to ban rifles?
No.
And, okay, I'm a little bit of a shill here, everybody. I'm the California spokesperson for the Pink Pistols. So I'd like to throw a couple of questions at you. I believe strongly in both we have an individual right to keep and bear arms, and we have a collective duty to own arms to protect keep our country a free country. But that being said, the level of violence we have in this country is unacceptable. So I'm going to run through some very short things, either yes or no, or if you want to embellish, that's fine. That I feel that would significantly reduce violence in our country. 70% plus of all firearms-related violence is related to our war on drugs and to gangs. Do you think that we should focus in on those particular areas, like really deal with the drug problem in this country? Personally, I support outright legalization, being a libertarian, but we have to, you know, we need to deal with the drugs and gangs, because that's 70% plus of gun-related violence in this country.
I absolutely agree, and this is not Turning Point standpoint, this is on a Paulina standpoint. I support legalization of marijuana at a federal level, yes, because of that reason.
Okay, now the next thing is this, is that a lot of people who commit crimes do so because they're desperate, because they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunity. Myself, I think that the role of government should be to promote economic opportunity. So would you support reducing unnecessary regulations and making the tax systems more smoother to encourage businesses and job opportunities so people could follow their dreams, their hopes, and their purposes and resort to legitimate things rather than criminal activities?
Absolutely, and do you guys know who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is? Yeah. Okay, so right now, I know this is like the fact that I even have to say this. So who likes having a dollar and keeping most of their dollar when they earn it? Okay, so how would you guys feel if I said, no, you guys are going to give me 70%, 70 cents for every dollar that you make? Would you guys like that? Okay, so what if I said that, and then if you guys don't do that, I'm going to throw you in jail? Would you guys like that either? Okay, so right now with the new Green Deal, and I'm sorry, I'm going to elaborate on this question, but 70% taxes to go towards some BS scam that's not even going to really work to help environmental standards. I think that that's a telltale sign when you kind of correlate that and then the call for gun restriction and regulation. I'm sorry, but I'm not giving you, most of my dollar. I'm going to keep it. And I think that that's really, if you look at it from a larger scale of things, what they're talking about right now, if we don't deal with this in the correct manner, especially for the border security, that, the next president might come in and do something with firearms. That'll never happen because the people will never give up their right to own firearms, but that goes along hand in hand with the government always remaining less powerful than the people.
Okay, and last part of this question, I'd like to ask the audience, if you don't mind. How many of you in here would support federal background checks for, if you want a gun, you have to get a federal background check if you want to purchase it. How many of you in here support that? It's good, including me. Now, I am a hardcore gun rights advocate, but I would be willing to give you that, but I want the following from you. Okay, number one, if I pass a background check, I can buy my gun from any federal dealer in any state. If I'm in Nevada or Arizona and I pass a background check, would you let me buy the gun there? As a California resident, show of hands.
Wait, what do you say?
What I'm saying is, if I pass the federal background check, I can buy from any federal dealer in the country. So if I'm a California resident, and let's say I'm in Arizona, and I see a gun that I want to buy, should I be able to buy it if I pass the background check? Well, we can't do that. You cannot do that right now. Because you can't do it. Okay, that's the federal law. Okay? Okay, right now. No, right now, because of the Federal Gun Control Act of 1968, if you want to purchase a firearm, you can only purchase firearms in the state that you are a resident of. That is the law. Okay? So I'm saying to you, I will agree to federal background check on all my guns, but I'd be able to buy a gun from any dealer anywhere in the country. Okay? Show of hands, yay or nay.
So what is the issue with
What is the issue is that in 1968, when they passed the Federal Gun Control Act of 1968 to disarm the Black Power movement, the Deacons for Peace and Justice, they created this law that you can only buy firearms in the state that you are a resident of. That is the thing. But you know what, young lady, you've got a lot of questions, and I'd be more than happy. No. I'd love to talk with you after the thing here, but just a quick show of hands for everybody. So I can buy in any state. Okay? Now what else, the other thing is this. I would like to say that all the states, that we have a uniform federal standard. If I pass a background check, that means that places like New York City, which if you want to buy a handgun, the application fee is $394. Does anybody think that's reasonable that a law-abiding citizen would have to pay $394 and wait 6 months to a year to lawfully purchase a handgun? Is that reasonable? Is that fair? Is that equitable? Show of hands. Okay, I'm going to go. But, no, sorry. Handguns right now, a decent handgun will run you between $600 to $1,000. Legal one.
Not a burner.
We have a next question over there.
You're fine. I'm going to take her shooting. She's going to turn into a Second Amendment.
Thanks for coming. So my question is, I think there are a lot of people that don't understand the fact that when governments get really big and they start to take away your guns, they will put you in prison for saying something wrong just because you said something wrong. So my question is there any way to convince someone that that is a reality that happens? And if so, how do you convince that person of that reality?
Yeah, I'm going to China.
Wait, what did you say?
Go to China, speak out against the Chinese government and see what happens.
That's not the question. Answer the question.
I did answer it. How do you show that that's going to work? I'm telling you, go to China where they don't have that right.
How do you show like an individual person? Like if I were speaking with someone individually?
I have them, literally have them read as to what happens in places like China where they don't have that right.
I know.
You can read on that stuff.
But they also don't have other basic rights in China.
This is true because they don't have firearms.
I'm going to ask everyone not to interrupt when two people are talking, please. Otherwise you'll have to leave the room. I'm sorry. I'm not suppressing your voice, I'm just telling you, let other people talk.
Are you going to call campus safety?
Yeah, maybe.
Hi Anna, thank you for coming. So I have two questions. My first question is, I'm a high school student, and so what are your opinions on the March for Our Lives movement? Because that's become a program or an organization that's become very present on my high school campus, and they claim to promote safety for students and the eradication of school shootings, which I think everybody agrees with and I personally agree with, but then it becomes highly politicized and promotes leftist agendas. So what advice would you give somebody like me who's in favor of safety and student safety and thinks that no student should ever be afraid of going to school, but doesn't agree with their position on guns?
So I can't say that I accidentally attended a March for Our Lives event actually in Portland, Oregon. So I showed up in downtown Portland during, I guess, one of the biggest marches in the United States. And I can't say that it is, yes, highly politicized. It wasn't just calling for school safety, it was calling for the abolishment of the Second Amendment, zero firearms, and to ban the NRA, and apparently that the NRA wants to kill little kids, is from the signs that I saw. I think that the biggest thing that you can do is make your voice heard. I know that it's very hard, especially when you feel like you're the minority, but I think that when you do so, that you will feel a lot better. You might lose friends over it. I know that because of my political stance and publicly, going on to Fox or like whatever it might be, whatever platform that I'm speaking on politics on, I know that I have lost friends over it, but I can say that I have also maintained friends on the other side, and that if people don't respect you as a person enough to respect your opinion and that it might differ from theirs, you don't need that in your life anyway. So look at it as a life cleanse and always stick true to your gut.
And my second question is, what are your opinions on President Trump's bump stock ban?
I don't think that it really accomplished anything, and I don't agree with it. I'm not, I absolutely am a conservative. I absolutely support most of the president's policies, but that was one thing that I could not get behind. And frankly, the bump stock and what happened in Las Vegas, they still, haven't really solved that. I don't really think that it was a solution to the problem.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your service to this country. So my question. So this is titled "Gun Rights or Women's Rights."
Yeah, school shootings.
Yeah, and that as well, and I agree 100%. But another point that, and I think you'll agree with me, is that gun rights can also help improve minority rights. And let's go back in history. In 1859, or it might have been 1857, in Dred Scott versus Sanford, and I don't think there's a single person here who agrees with that Supreme Court decision. Because if people don't know what that is, that's when a former slave went to the North. He sued for his freedom. The Supreme Court said no. And one of the most impactful lines in that decision by Roger B. Taney, one of the most despicable decisions that this country has ever seen, is when he said that African Americans should not have the rights of other citizens. And the main one that he highlighted was that they should not have the right to bear arms because they would be able to fight back and get their freedom. So that's one of those things. Now we come to current time. We look at Chicago, we look at inner cities, we look at these gun-free zones. They're anything but. Can you please also elaborate on how gun rights, and I'm sure, and I think it's quite clear, how gun rights can also further improve minority rights?
So I know, I'm the director of Hispanic engagement, but the first thing that I always like to say is that, like, first and foremost, I might be half Hispanic, but I'm American, like, through and through. That's what I identify as. I think that historically speaking, if you're looking at how the Democratic Party essentially founded the KKK, how the NRA really taught African Americans in the civil rights era to protect themselves, if you're looking at it historically, I absolutely agree. But I think that, aside from that, we really need to maintain the fact that if you're starting to talk on, things like skin color, it can be divisive, and that's a tactic that a lot of times, people on the left like to use to really keep people from talking and establishing the dialogue. I absolutely agree, but I think that, at the end of the day, it's an American right. I don't really agree with anything else other than that. I'm American, I serve this country, and I'm born here, and that's what I own.
Yes, thank you for your time. To respond to the question of why we think that these things would continue down this path, and to leave the Second Amendment for a moment, there used to be this thing in America called the free speech zones. It was pretty despicable, and the federal government said, well, the only way you can protest the president is if you stand over here in this little corner, and that's a real mess. And it took a long time for the Supreme Court to figure out, and to make it all the way to the Supreme Court and say, no, that's not cool. The First Amendment is what it says. So, I don't know anybody that ever wants to rule over me that doesn't say they have the best of intentions, and they always want to help me and make my life better. But they do want to rule. And you just look at those free speech zones, and looking back at them 20, 25 years later, it's like, well, that was insane. Who would ever do that? But, oh no, 9/11, have to keep the protesters off to the side. We have good reasons for it. But it was a real mess the whole way through.
So I noticed a few examples of Mexico and China and going to these places being brought up. And then what you were saying is that, like, if people had guns, they could fight back. What, I mean, me personally, I kind of recognize, like, our federal government's power, and even if I had a room full of guns, there's no way I can fight off, even if I had a bunch of people. But I think the difference is our troops, and this is something you told me, they don't serve the president, or any leader, their loyalty is to the Constitution. He said that if there was a leader who ordered something like confiscate guns or kill all these group of people, the army would say, no, that violates the Constitution. They have the right to that. And then I think the problem with Mexico, at least from what I've seen, is their government structure. It's very gridlocked. No one party can get control except in this recent election. And I think also, adding on to his point, the war on drugs has had a significant effect for violence. And with regards to China, I know that they have a lot of civil liberty issues beyond just even guns. Like, I recently saw a surveillance thing. They're putting technology to recognize faces so no one can go anywhere without being recognized or spotted, and they can.
I mean, that you have to take into consideration too that they literally have a point system to where if you're deemed like a good citizen, you'll get priority in certain things, which is completely crazy.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't like your attitude, I'd be like, you're a bad citizen. You can't go grocery shopping now.
Exactly, and the problem with that is the military of China, they have no constitution or no rights to be loyal to. Their loyalty is to their leader. So whatever the leader decides, they'll act upon that. And I'm proud that, you know, there are revolutionaries in China trying to fight back against that corruption, but I think it's not necessarily just citizens having guns. I feel like it's the institutions in the countries themselves that cause a lot of the problems. And I think that that issue needs to be solved in order to extend the civil liberties first.
I think though that when you have a government that maintains a hold like that on its people, that they're not inclined to let that go freely. And how do you, I mean, you can't just do a sit-in and expect people, like the government of China to be like, oh yeah, here are your civil liberties back. I mean, that just doesn't work in these places. They jail you, they send you to work camps, and then you're never heard of again. And that happens. I mean, if you're literally like a Christian person over there trying to recruit people, they're literally jailed. If they think that you're working with another person, you're jailed. If you speak out against the government, you're jailed. I mean, that is really the rest of the world that we live in.
I guess the only thing I kind of see is that with the might of the Chinese military or American military or any major Chinese military, even with guns, even if everybody in this room is armed, if they sent in a SWAT team, we would all be dead.
I think that's wrong. I think that it only took less than 3% actually of the colonists to fight against the British, and that was organized military. I think that underserves really the might and the will of people to rebel. I think that no rebellion's been, I mean, it's never been professional soldiers fighting with, and I think that really discredits really the founding principles of who we are as people. And I can tell you this right now, being a veteran myself, that I've met a lot of people that haven't served that have probably been more patriotic than the people I served next to and probably would be more inclined to stand up if they ever saw the government becoming too strong. Although I'm not sitting here trying to incite a revolution, I'm just being realistic. It's very easy for people to stay here and sit on their smartphones and be like, oh, no one would stand up. But then again, that's the difference between someone who sits by and lets, you know, history happen and someone who actively partakes. It's called a backbone.
I'm glad that you and your friends uphold the Constitution and not necessarily just the I'll pass it.
Yeah, so
So my question is, like, you've been saying that evil will like always happen and like it'll just be there. So like, do you actually think that the people who carry out these mass shootings are just inherently evil, or do you, because to me it seems like there's underlying causes as to why someone would go about doing that. Like, do you really think it's just because they're just evil? Like,
I think you can call it a cause, you can call it evil, but I think when you sit there and you plan to kill someone, whether it's with a vehicle, by eating them, butchering them, or shooting them, I think that you have some serious problems, and I think that I can't really chalk it up to anything other than being evil. I think that you can call it, you know, psychological imbalance, say that they can be medicated, but I think that there are certain things that you just can't fix, and one of them is that.
we have time for one more question.
My question's not related to guns, so.
It doesn't matter, you have the right to speak.
So over the course of this meeting, like there's been like a couple times where you reference like political correctness, and this is like something that I've thought a lot about, but I just like generally don't understand why conservatives have this animosity towards political correctness.
and I would just really like it if you could like explain that to me. And I'm like being really genuine, I don't get it.
So I can't explain it for all conservatives, but I can tell you what my personal stance is and why I have issues with political correctness. And I can say from a personal experience that I had in the military, when you are too worried about essentially quote unquote hurting someone's feelings or offending someone, you're not going to be able to get the message across. I'm a very matter-of-fact person, and sometimes people don't like what I have to say. But by me saying it, it establishes that line of communication. If I'm so worried about hurting your feelings that I can't get that message across, sometimes the solution isn't fixed. And I think that when you're in a society, especially in politics, and you cannot get that message across, then what the hell is the point of even talking? I mean, you can be polite, but if you're constantly having to worry about what's being politically correct and really offending someone, it's going to completely take away the ability for us to establish this dialogue.
Okay. I know this is going to sound like me trying to like pick apart your argument, but I'm like genuinely just curious. Like, so what would you say about, so like, you know how in Virginia, or was it West Virginia, how there were representatives that it had come out that they had shown up in blackface?
Okay, that guy's just a jackass.
Okay, but that's what
Yeah.
so that's what I'm saying.
But like, I couldn't go on television and be like, he's a jackass, because that's not politically correct. Even though we all think he's a jackass, even though we thought it was insensitive and stupid,
Yeah.
if I said that, it's not politically correct.
Okay, so if those people doing that, that's just them being jackasses, that's not preventing a conversation, right?
In my opinion, I will tell them that I think they're being a jackass. However, when you have people that are too worried to say that and to really get that across, I think that that's a problem. I think that political correctness in that term, are you talking like in the sense of like me commentating, are you talking like in politics, or are you just saying in general on the internet, like what context?
I'm saying in general, so like, but I think we're talking about different things. Like, I don't think that people would say that was incorrect if you called like those guys that showed up as blackface jackasses. Like what I'm saying is like, people have an issue with them showing up in blackface because it's not politically correct, right?
I can't speak for other people. I think that people would say that, but my term of politically correctness is different. Obviously, that guy is like totally wrong for doing it, and that, yes, that is not, I guess for argument's sake, politically correct. I think he's a total idiot for doing that. I don't even think that that is like an issue of political correctness. I think that he's racist. I think that the guy, when he puts a noose around a man who's dressed as a black man and has a Klan hood on, I think that that's a racist, ignorant thing to do. That has nothing to do with political correctness and everything to do with him being like a bad person.
I like agree with you, but I think it does have to do with political, like correctness is kind of like an umbrella type thing. But like, what are like some examples of political correctness that like holds back those types of conversations?
Well, and exactly this one right now. So for example, I could not go on television and say, wow, he was a jackass for doing what he did, because me calling a representative a jackass is not politically correct. I would have to tread very lightly when speaking around someone with a political title because of people in television, or whether or not they agree with my points of views. I'm telling you, for like having been in media, there are certain things you can and cannot say. And there are certain things you can and cannot write and publish, and that is the political correct guideline.
Okay, so what about like, okay, so like, I understand like bad language and stuff, like that's not politically correct, but like I mean like other things, like you were.
Well, I obviously agree with you in that state. Like, I don't think that it's wrong for, I don't think that it's wrong for you to call someone out. I think that that's, I guess you're looking at it from like the other standpoint, like do I agree with that type of political, absolutely I agree with that. But I think that people like to overuse the term politically correct for when they don't agree with something or something offends them. They'll be like, oh, that's not politically correct, you can't talk on that. And I think that that happens a lot, especially in the media, having worked in media, and a lot actually in regards to published news as well.
Yeah, I agree. But like, you also like associated political correctness with weakness. Why is that?
I think that if you can't take someone else's honest opinion and you have to hide behind the fact that it offends you, I think that that's a little bit of a weak mentality. I obviously do not go into conversations attacking people or being a jerk to them or like cussing them out. But in my opinion, if you can't take the truth without being offended, that's, in my opinion, weak. I'm not saying that if you think that what that dude did in Virginia is wrong, like I completely don't agree with what he did. But what I'm saying is that in general, political correctness, this whole argument of that if it offends you, it's not politically correct, I think that that's wrong. Obviously, the guy that dressed up in the KKK Klan outfit and blackface, I think that he's a very bad person. I think that he's racist.
Yeah.
What would you say about like the representatives of calling Trump like a motherfucker? Like, is she allowed to say that then?
I think that that goes under the guise of what's politically correct. If you want it, my personal opinion, I don't think that we need to be putting stipulations on people's freedom of speech. I don't agree with her. I wouldn't frankly call any representative that, especially not the president. I think it's trashy to do so. But I think the problem is that you have people on the left doing it, and then people on the right do it, and it's not fair. So that's the problem. You have a one-sided, very narrow mindset, especially with the media. I mean, the media provides what 90s.
Right is like criticizing her now for saying that, even though they.
Well, I think that in general, anytime that you call the president a mother effer, I think that people are going to be like, hey, that's not appropriate. If we did that to Obama, it wouldn't be appropriate either. And I don't even like Obama. I wouldn't refer to a political representative, especially the leader of the free world, as that, personally. But I also don't think that it's fair for people to put stipulations on what certain groups can and cannot do. Why is it that that representative on the left can say that, but if you say that on the right, it's looked at as so horrific and so terrible? I mean, because you have people on the right calling, people in government now that are not backing Israel as, Islamophobic and whatnot. I think that you lose the dialogue with the term political correctness because it's seen as a one-sided argument. That's the argument that I'm making.
Yes, I see your point, but I think that, like, I don't know.
I mean, it goes into interpretation of what you think is right? So, like, my version of political correctness is, hey, I wouldn't do something, I didn't really agree with it because it gets rid of dialogue. I would never personally refer to any elected official as that, but you're saying, okay, well,
That other guy's a jackass, so is that just because, like, you think the other...
I think being racist is, I think any person who's racist is a jackass. That's my personal opinion.
I'm going to have to break off, we are sorry, but we have the room only for a limited time.
Sorry.
You guys can talk to her afterwards, I hope. We can chat. But I want to thank everyone for coming over here. And